So now moving on to modern economic growth. Now remember, when I talk about modern economic growth, what that means is that we're looking at the kind of the start point of that being again 1776 or with the Wealth of Nations book from Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith, the Scottish Enlightenment economist, who was actually, his title was moral philosopher. That was his expertise at the time, well before the name economics came into vogue. Anyway, so efficient financial institutions, all these are things that are kind of required, if you will, for our economic growth to actually occur. Efficient financial institutions, meaning that we have to have proper, banking and, not just banks, of course, like credit unions, so on and so forth. And we'll be talking more about that kind of going forward. But we have to have those efficient financial institutions because, again, when people are, whether we're talking about the household or if we're talking about the firm, it's important for them to have access to loans, to credit, if you will. And efficient financial institutions are the best path forward for that. Access to, again, these various means of by which they could that individuals and firms can, individuals meaning individual households, etc. And also firms that they can access, having access to that credit. It's very important. Literacy education. And again, we've talked about this over and again in the class, but the idea behind this education is to build that human capital, and the rationale for building that human capital, again, turning back to our friend Adam Smith with the invisible hand of competition, you cannot help but to, in furthering your own, doing something in your own benefit, you cannot help avoid helping the overall commonweal or the society in general. And so what that means is by building your education, in this case your literacy, developing your human capital in this form, it's going to be advantageous for yourself because you are, as we've mentioned again in class, increasing your own opportunity cost, meaning that yes, it's more expensive for the firm to hire you, better for you, but also it's better for the firm. The firm is going to be benefiting from that, or your potential employer, whomever that might be. Could be yourself, could be your own company, but anyway, you get the idea, is that by adding this education, you would be benefiting yourself, of course, not just knowledge, but your financial prospects, and also the reason that a firm would hire you or some entity would hire you is that you would make it profitable for them as well. Okay, and then that is passed along ultimately to the household as consumer, because very similar to the whole idea about adding technology is that it's increasing efficiency. So the more productive is the labor, the more that productivity is ultimately, or should ultimately, be passed on to the household as consumer through that competitive process, right? That competitive free market capitalism just below. Anyhow, also modern economic growth, what that brings us is leisure. Meaning, again, if you divide your day into two parts, leisure and work, the more income that you have, of course, the more leisure that you want. That would be that's the sign of a normal good, right? But in order to acquire that leisure, you have to work more. So this is where, again, the whole idea of working smarter, not harder, comes into play. It's not entirely true. You still have to work hard, of course, but the idea, again, is that the more you can develop your own human capital, the higher is going to be your compensation, and the more compensation you have from your work, the more leisure you will be able to afford. This is, again, what was brought on by this modern economic growth idea, going back again to Adam Smith in 1776. Another hallmark of modern economic growth is this concept of free trade, because prior to this free trade, we had such programs as there is not that there wasn't trade. but there was mercantilism. More was kind of the the trade of the day, if you will. And what that is with mercantilism, that has to do with home markets like England, for example, uh, building finished products, uh, and the colonies, if you will, would be importing those finished products, and in exchange, the colonies would be sending raw materials to England. Okay, so the free trade piece of it comes into play where, or the comparative advantage rather comes into play where it beneficial to both sides. And this is where trade balances out a variety of different ways in which it kind of manifests itself. But this whole idea of free trade, it's more than just free trade. It's also balanced trade. It's also equitable trade. Really, this is where that whole idea of equity kind of comes into play too. Both sides have to benefit from this trade that's out there that's available. Anyhow, again, the way forward with this was again through this competitive market process, this competitive market system that I purposely, it's not just capitalism, it's not just free market capitalism, but it's that competitive free market capitalism, that invisible hand type of capitalism that was foreshadowed, if you will, that was forecasted, that was put out there by Adam Smith well before we had anything close to that. Okay, and even today we don't, but we are closer today, certainly, than we would have been 50, 100, 200 years ago. Okay, anyway, on we go. So when we talk about determining economic growth, it's some basic concepts to kind of cover here. And that is that by increasing supply, increasing the amount of those productive resources that we have available, that labor, entrepreneurship, capital, and land, it's going to, as the effect of what? Driving prices down, because you're shifting that supply curve to the right. I don't have this on here, but all else equal, meaning that the demand curve stays the same. And I know that's not the case, it's always changing as well, but just for the purposes of this kind of illustration in your mind, and that is that if the supply curve shifts to the right, that's increasing the supply of whatever those productive resources that are being employed are, then it's going to reduce prices, again, all else equal. And also in conjunction with that, what we say is that we talk about this notion, this idea of effective demand, meaning that we have to have the financial resources in order to to absorb that demand, the effective demand. We have to have the financial resources to absorb the supply, rather. So again, the question is, if you don't have the proper enough demand, effective demand, enough money, people will be able to buy these things, then what happens? Again, you'd end up with higher inventories. You end up with market failure, right? When the demand for a product falls off and there's adequate supply, and then you go from adequate supply to not enough demand to absorb that supply, you end up with excess inventories, and again, driving us down into that whole concept, that idea of that of market failure. Okay, so efficiency refers to production of most goods and services at the lowest possible price. Again, this is the hallmark of this is that efficiency at the firm, and driving prices down at the firm, driving down cost at the firm, and ultimately through that invisible hand being passed on to the consumer. And this is driving, I should say, that consumer sovereignty, those competitive forces. So again, further, when we talk about production possibility curve, it's the whole idea of pushing out that production possibility curve. This is where we have economic growth. This is, again, along the lines of this modern economic growth. We've seen production possibility curves go out quite far, not just in the U.S., but the world over. Always keep this in mind. It's not just about the U.S., it's about the entire world. And certainly when you think about situations like in countries like India, for example, or China, as well, is that we've seen massive amounts of economic growth, and this is where that production possibility curve is pushed outward. Two more points. One is the consumption possibility curve, and the whole idea behind this the consumption possibility curve. This is where, again, we're limited with our production possibility curve. Being on that curve, that's the maximum. That's our point of efficiency, right? That's when we have productive efficiency. But if we choose to say we would want to produce more capital goods, but we don't, we would prefer not to forego or sacrifice consumer goods, there's an option, and that option comes through the trade route, meaning where we would be able to do what? Import more consumer goods or more capital goods or some combination thereof, and that would end up pushing our production possibility curve artificially outward. However, pushing it out beyond what it should otherwise be able to produce. But we're just looking at it in terms of consumption, meaning that we're able to consume more than we're actually producing. Okay, so that can be good. There are pluses and minuses associated with that, right? So the plus, of course, is that we would be able to redeploy some of our productive resources to some area that we want to focus on. If we want to focus on more consumer goods, we could focus more there, import more capital goods, or vice versa. We could, if we wanted to focus more on our own production on capital goods, we could import more consumer goods. And lastly, and this is, so the U.S., of course, is involved with this, actually in terms of that consumption possibility curve, because we are a net importer, meaning we have that net exports of goods and services, or NEGs, meaning that we import more than we export. So this is where the locomotive effect comes into play. So when the U.S. economy is growing, when it's expanding, hopefully at a rate of 3% or more, real GDP-wise, then what would happen is that we would be importing more from the rest of the world. Okay, and so what that does is that those imports from other countries' economies would be adding to our overall aggregate supply. Again, it's another form of this consumption possibility curve, if you will. So we're adding more supply than otherwise would be the case. And this, the beauty of the locomotive effect, of course, is since we're the largest economy in the world by far, then this locomotive effect is there's spillover, if you will, in a positive manner in terms of other countries being able to benefit from this. So now changing gears a bit, I wanted to walk into the unemployment or employment and U3 unemployment, and these are all just different variations, if you will, on the same basic theme. Again, the unemployment rate is the reciprocal, if you will, of the employment rate. So when we're talking about unemployment or U3 unemployed, we're saying that we're looking at what the number of the people that are not employed but are actively seeking employment. Those two criteria have to be met. Not employed but actively seeking employment. And to arrive at the unemployment rate, we would take the unemployed divided by the labor force, and the labor force is equal to the employed plus the unemployed. Okay? Anyway, so we'll continue with that as we kind of go forward here. So the current state and the current unemployment rate, or the U3 unemployment rate for the nation, was 4.4% in February 2026, whereas from a year prior it was a bit lower at 4.2% in February of 2025. And we'll be talking more about why this may or may not be the case as we kind of go forward. Conversely, Michigan, the unemployment rate has actually gone down from December 2024 at 5.2% down to 5.0%, 0% in December 2025. And there's a lag in reporting at the state level. It comes out at the national level, and then it filters down to the state level maybe a month and a half behind. So that's why we don't have more current numbers here. So On a monthly basis, the Bureau of Labor Statistics publishes employment statistics. Okay, this is where we arrive at our unemployment rate and lots of other stuff that kind of issues forth. And this is through what's called the Current Population Survey, which is actually done by the Census Bureau, which is part of the Bureau of Economic Analysis. Okay, and under the Secretary of Commerce, or the commerce level, if you will, at the federal level, the Department of Commerce, whereas the BLS, or the Bureau of Labor Statistics, is under the Department of Labor. All right, the Secretary of Labor. These are all cabinet level folks under the executive or the president, if you will. So the February 2026 employment situation, where we reach that, where we publish that U3 unemployment rate, where that came from, is we start with first the population, meaning the population in the U.S. is about 345 million people, I guess, right now, and so we're removing some people from that. So the first thing the first cut is that civilian non-institutional population. So what that does is it takes out the folks that are under 16 years of age, the youth, and also takes out other folks that are counted by institutions, including the military, prisons, nursing homes, etc., along those lines, right? Anyway, so that number in February was at 274,766,000. Okay, and underneath that, and the change from January to February was 90,000, which is a pretty low number, but these numbers they do fluctuate, but just to give you an idea, that's the change from February. From January to February was 90,000 people were added to the civilian non-institutional population. It's typically about 200,000 plus. So underneath that would be the labor force, and so or the civilian labor force, is that the labor force is equal to those people that are employed, and also those people that are unemployed, or that U3 unemployed, the people that are not employed but are actively seeking employment. So that's what constitutes that labor force. So that is a subset of the civilian non-institutional populations, 274,766,000, the labor force being 170,483,000, or 104,000 less than the civilian non-institutional population. So I'll jump ahead just a bit here when we talk about at the bottom here, the not in the labor force component. That is, again, the civilian non-institutional population less the labor force. So who are these folks that are not in the labor force component? It's a huge number. It's very large. It's more than a third, if you will, of that total. Anyway, at 104 million. So those would include people that are, of course, like people that are retirees, older folks, not the youth, because remember, under age 16, they're already pulled out of the equation. So these would be stay-at-home spouses, or whatever, people that are not participating in the labor force. Speaking of that, back up to the labor force. The next thing that we look at category is the labor force participation rate, which is equal to the labor force divided by, or percentage of, as a percentage of the civilian non-institutional population. And that was at 62% in February, which is down a bit, down 0.01%, or 0.1% rather, anyhow, it's down by 0.1. It should be. The point being is that there is a drop off, if you will, in terms of that labor force as a percentage of the civilian non-institutional population overall. The next one down, the components of that labor force, the largest component, hopefully, is the employed. And so what we notice with the employed number is employment dropped by 185,000 at that 162,912 million people. And the next ratio down that we're looking at is the employment population ratio, which is simply looking at the employment employed divided by that civilian non-institutional population, and that dropped as well down to 59.3%. The next line down, the other component of the labor force is unemployed. That unemployed number grew by 203,000 to 7,571,000. Not a good thing. So that drove up the unemployment rate by 0.1%, or from 4.3 up to 4.4%. So this is something that comes out on a monthly basis, and it might seem a little bit wonky, but it's actually pretty simple, pretty straightforward. And there are different things to kind of watch out for. And what you'll notice is that I've got green arrows, which is, a positive, something good, I suppose, and red arrows where whether it's going up or down, indicating, which direction, but that not so good, right? Anyway, so again, this is something to kind of keep an eye on pretty much on a monthly basis, something that's published in typically the first Friday of the month, unless there's something going on under the Department of Labor. Um, and typically when we think about that U3 unemployed, the people that are not employed but are actively seeking employment, that leaves out a lot of people, including folks that are on the sidelines, and it's not counted here. This is different levels of underemployment, or these alternative measures of kind of different ways of measuring this unemployment, but they call it something different. They say it's, underemployment or whatnot. But anyway, the idea is that, sometimes when we think about these things, there are people, again, that are on the sidelines that are not working, that probably should be. They would be capable of working and probably should be working, but are not. And that's for a variety of reasons. But we'll talk more about that going forward. But again, I just wanted to point this out to you, that there are other ways of measuring this. And the one that really stands out, aside from that U3 or that official unemployment rate, or it being at 4.4%, that's the U3. The next one down that I want to talk about is U6 is at the bottom. And U6 unemployed, again, I'll just read this off. U6 total unemployed plus all people marginally attached to the labor force plus total employed part-time for economic reasons as a percentage of that civilian labor force plus all people marginally attached to the labor force. So basically, it's the folks that are beyond, or U3 going through U4, U5, and then this last addition would be people that are working. Yes, they're actually employed, but they're working part-time because for economic reasons, meaning that, yeah, my boss likes me and wants me to continue working, but he's cut my hours, or she's cut my hours from 40 hours a week full-time down, cut it in half, so now I'm only working half-time, but I would prefer to be working full-time. So there are different kind of measurements of this, and it's probably a bit more accurate. This U6 is probably more useful because it kind of picks up a lot more people that are on the sidelines that are not counted by U3, but really should be counted as unemployed, or at least underemployed, okay? And remember, it even goes beyond this, because there are people on the sidelines that have given up looking for work altogether. And this is not picked up by these numbers. And we'll talk more about that again kind of going forward. So with that in mind, what I just said about the people that are on the sidelines that are not picked up by any of those different U1 through U6 categories of unemployment or underemployment, there are a lot of people that are on the sidelines that are not counted at all, again. So when we look at the civilian labor force participation rate, or the labor force participation rate, again, that is the labor force, or the employed plus the unemployed, divided by that civilian non-institutional population. And again, the civilian non-institutional population is equal to those folks that are 16 years and older that are not counted in other institutions, meaning military, prison, nursing homes, etc. Okay, and so again, that's the civilian non-institutional population. So these are the people that, in the labor force that are in the labor force as a percentage of that civilian non-institutional population. Again, the labor force is equal to the employed plus the unemployed. So I like to think about it as the people that are kind of at the oars. Either they're pulling on the oars, growing the economy, uh, uh, or they want to be. They're waiting, on the boat, and they're waiting to be pulling those oars, but they are unemployed. So the thing to note here is that if we go back to the early 2000s, we had a significantly higher labor force participation rate. And there are lots of reasons for this. Among them would be that there are numbers, the growing cohort, not the cohort itself, but the growing numbers of folks that are not in the labor force that would be, the retirees, the baby boomers, the people born from 1946 to 1964. That's part of it. But what's interesting to note here is that there's more to talk about going forward, but just keep this in mind, is that, okay, if people are retiring, you would think that there would be other folks behind them to kind of backfill, to fill in those openings, and they should be participating at even higher rates, meaning those folks that are age 16 up to, we'll just say up to 65. So we're looking at roughly a 50-year group of people that should be participating at even higher rates because those other people have vacated those positions, okay? But what we notice is that after the Great Recession in 2008, 2009, that participation rate fell, which it makes some sense, going through some rough times, but it continued to drop, and it really stayed very, very low, relatively speaking, all the way out through. It started to come back up again in about 2018, and then of course it dropped again with with COVID in 2020. It fell off the table, and the thing to note is that it did not get back up even to the previous level, and that's kind of where we're at today. We're kind of stuck in neutral, and so this is again not a pretty picture. So the significance of this is plain in that if you think about this number is probably about anywhere from 5 to 10 million, probably closer to 10 million people that are on the sidelines. So bear that in mind. And bear also in mind that in order for the economy to grow, we have to have what? We have to have people working out there participating in this labor force, whether they're employed or wanting to be working in that unemployed group. So there's no surprise here that if we go back to, again, prior to this the Great Recession in 2008, going back to 2005, that was really the last time we had kind of normal or at least moderate economic growth. And there were some spurts that we had. There was one in 2018 where we were at 3%, but aside from that, aside from the ups and downs associated with this COVID, we really haven't clawed back to that 3% level. In fact, we didn't hit it again this year, in 2025, this previous year, I should say. Anyway, things to keep in mind, right? So again, speaking of this labor force participation rate, or focusing still on this labor force participation rate, I want to walk through something that is quite curious, in fact, and that is that breaking this out by age cohorts, meaning typically, so 16 to 24, it's not 10 years, but it's up to that first mark, if you will, and then after that it goes from 25 to 34, 35 to 44, 45 to 54, 55 to 64, and then we'll just lump them into 65 and older. And they're different. There are other ways of measuring this, but this is kind of the stock way that I've looked at this over the course of the last, dare I say, 20 years. My goodness. Anyway, so going on 20 years, I've been kind of focusing on this. And this labor force participation rate, again, the labor force is equal to employed plus unemployed. The participation rate is, again, then the labor force divided by that civilian non-institutional population. Okay, and again, the civilian non-institutional population are the folks that are 16 years and older that are pulled out, that are not counted by other institutions, meaning by military, prison, or like nursing homes, etc. Okay, so two things I want to show you, and there's been some big changes over the years, but three things. We'll just stick with three things. First, 16 to 24, those numbers are down. In September 2007 or through 2007, the 2007, it was probably about this level, about 60%. And so it's down from 59.5% to this year in February, it's at 54.3%. This is huge. These are large numbers. Bear in mind, we're talking about labor force or civilian non-institutional populations being, civilian non-institutional population being 270 plus million, and the labor force being 170 million plus, right? So these are huge numbers, and this is just one 10-year segment of it, but it's a huge population nonetheless. So why is it down? These are questions that have to be kind of asked. A variety of different things, and I'm sure there have been studies on this, but things that kind of come to mind would be, for example, most people that have insurance through their parents, they would stay on and I'm saying insurance, health insurance, their health insurance through their parents. They can stay on their parents' plan through the age of 26. So, the words come to mind like arrested development, just somewhat joking here, but the idea is that perhaps there's not quite the necessity to be out there working. And again, people say, oh, maybe they're going to school. Yeah, of course. They were going to school in 2007 also, this age group. So that's kind of it's kind of a red herring. It does not kind of answer the question in a thorough, if you way, at the very least. So that's one thing. Where are these people? They should be working, and they're not. They should not be. They should be participating at higher levels, but they're not. Again, for a variety of reasons. The next thing I want to look at, and we'll get to the FYI on the side of the screen here, but the 65 and older, those groups, again, in September 2007, participating at about a 16% rate, and now in February 26, it's much, much higher at about 19%. So why are these older people working? Two quick answers. One, they need to. They need the income. They weren't prepared for retirement, if you will, for stepping out of the labor force, so they're having to stay in. That's one, out of necessity. Another is that some people prefer to work. And along those lines, they're able to work, meaning that a lot of these jobs are not as labor intensive. If you're sitting behind the desk and working on a computer, it's not quite as arduous as being out there, or difficult labor, physically wise, as going out there digging ditches when you're 65 years of age and older. Anyway, those are two quick things. One more thing to note, and there's something where it's kind of an expression in economics. It's a thought that in order to make it in this life, being able to build up enough reserves, savings to kind of get you through to this retirement phase. Typically, we look at those prime earning years between age 25 and 55. So there's like a 30-year window. And my expectation, again, is that these numbers in those age groups in particular, 16 to 24 dropping irrespective of that, other age groups, that participation should be up significantly. And yes, it is up, relatively speaking, in 2026. But I'm thinking people should be participating at even higher rates than what we're showing today. All right, and so that's kind of a thought. So those were three things. One last thing on the right-hand side is something I alluded to before, in that there are a lot of people that are out of the labor force. But if you make that adjustment from that 62.4%, we're at 62%, so it's even a little bit lower, up to that 66.1% kind of average back in the early 2000s, that would equate to about 10 million people being on the sidelines. So even if you were to add 5 million people to the labor force, that would move that needle up just a couple of percentage points. So again, when we talk about these large numbers moving those percentages, it takes a lot to move that. So there's a huge difference between 66% and 62%. All right, and this is something that. So what I'm driving at with this is that there are a lot more people out there on the sidelines that that should be working. And the question is, why aren't they? Is it because of our social insurance net that's out there in terms of welfare, in terms of Medicaid rather, in terms of again uh, uh, our youth being able to remain under their parents' insurance programs plans until the age 26? Is this part of the cost? Certainly. Is this, was there fallout following COVID where people had much more ready access, could more readily access a lot of these social welfare safety net type programs? Yes, that's certainly part of the issue as well. Anyway, some things to kind of keep in mind as we kind of go forward. So changing gears again, as we are wont to do in economics, when we talk about competition in the business cycle. So with competition, firms are unable to raise prices as readily in product markets, goods and services, right? That's pretty straightforward. Meaning that firms, if they had their choice, they would, if they wanted to, if they had the power to, they would raise prices. Again, that's market power or price power. So again, that competition kind of prevents that from happening. Likewise, in terms of competition in the resource markets, so those are the productive resources, meaning that the labor, entrepreneurship, capital, and land, that those productive resources that are owned by the household, um, then when there is competition, households are less likely to receive more than their opportunity cost level of compensation. This speaks to that whole idea of equity, 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 equity. So this combination of equity and efficiency that I've harped on quite a bit, it's driven by this invisible hand of competition, meaning that in order to have efficiency at the firm first, you have to have equity, meaning that the firm is not paying more for those productive resources than their opportunity cost level that they should be receiving, right? So again, there's that competitiveness at the firm. Lower wages, lower cost for land and all the other components of the entrepreneurship and the capital, all right? And in order to, and the reason that that is important is that in order for firms to be efficient, they have to have lower cost on their end in order to pass those lower costs on to the household as consumers. Because as consumers, we love efficiency. That's where we receive the biggest bang for our buck. Okay, so how do we like our goods and services as consumers? We like them cheap, right? Lowest price. We like them plentiful, and we like them to be of a reasonable quality, meaning that we have to have substitutes out there to reinforce this whole process. So that's the beauty of this equity and efficiency. In order to have efficient markets for the consumer, which we all want, that means that there has to be equity first where at the firm. Um, anyhow, these are the drivers that are behind this. This is more of a micro topic, but nonetheless, it's very important because this competition, again, at this business cycle, in this economic cycle that we talk about, these market interruptions, this market failure that occurs, when we have these competitive markets where we have equity and efficiency at play, or at least present, hopefully, there's less likelihood of what? Of market failure. And if there is market failure, it's not going to last as long. The duration is not going to be as long, nor would we have as deep of recessions or lengthy recessions, okay? So one last point, this is for all of us, and that is the perils of overly generous salaries. What might happen if you're overly compensated? If there is an economic downturn, you would be the first one that your entrepreneur boss would be looking at, because they don't want to fire themselves. They want to fire those more expensive people, get rid of them if they can. And that's kind of the focus, honestly. So again, just be aware of that. And this is kind of a personal note, is that if you're hired in at a very high rate, be cautious. I'm not saying not to take the job, but just be aware that you are certainly on the bubble with that. So this is where you really, really have to be able to perform, keeping these things in mind, not to scare you away, but just to give you fair warning. So again, long-term economic growth, this is the key to this, pushing this production possibility curve out further, further, further. That's the whole idea, right? So we'll be talking a bit more about taxes, but just kind of as a brief introduction to this. When we talk about taxes at the federal level, first off, they kind of came kind of late, meaning that the first formal um, federal income tax was passed. I forget which amendment, 16th Amendment, something like that. Anyways, it was in like 1913. Okay, so it came kind of late. It's not as old as people might think. It's not to say that we didn't have income taxes, federal income taxes before that, but most of the revenue that was generated prior to this federal income tax was coming from tariffs, believe it or not. Anyway, so the idea behind this federal income tax is that we have a graduated tax, and again, we'll explain this more as we kind of go forward. Um, where we have a graduated income tax, where it's marked by marginal tax rates, meaning that the more income that you earn, yes, the more taxes you'll pay, but you would be at the higher levels of income, you will be paying incrementally higher levels of taxes based upon which margin we're talking about, okay? And the idea behind that was that we were seeking to do what? Redistribute income. We were looking for income redistribution, meaning we were looking more toward, the focus was trying to what? Move us more toward a more equal income distribution. More to follow. So anyway, so effects on economy, what causes the economy to implode or explode? Saving is unconsumed production, meaning that again, our income goes to taxes, and it goes to consumption, it goes to saving. So saving is the last piece of this. It's that unconsumed production. Rather than going out there, uh, uh, you know, being a good consumer and buying all this stuff up, we're setting that money aside. Not a good thing or a bad thing, but the downside of that is that it's unconsumed production. We're not producing as much or consuming as much of that production as we otherwise would be. But on the upside is that increases the amount of investment. Investment meaning is that it makes its way from our savings account back into the economy through that investment, that gross private domestic investment in particular, meaning where we're growing the firm, where we're adding capital equipment to the firm. Via financial capital, we're buying more, we're buying more of that physical capital for the firm itself. So this is that upside downside that increased investment causes to go up, but the first stop again is that saving, that unconsumed production. Next, taxes. They are depressing. Taxes, because again, it's taking away from your income. It's reducing your income. More specifically, again, it's reducing your disposable income, what you have to spend after taxes, right? The good part about it is that it funds government, and at least part of government's role is to address market failure, right? And the other thing to keep in mind is that government spending on the right side for those injections is that is a boon to the economy. It helps the economy grow. So there's a downside and an upside, right? So again, GPDI further, it reduces current consumption in terms of the household. It reduces, again, that production possibility curve, where when we add to that investment, we're adding more to capital goods. We're producing more capital goods. and we are not producing as much consumer goods. So it kind of takes away from the household as consumer. But it is also an injection because we're accumulating that physical capital. And by building that physical capital, we're employing people at the firm. And by employing people at the firm, it's adding to the income of the household for the use of those productive resources, for that labor, capital, entrepreneurship, and land. So onward, GCE and GI, that's government expenditures, it reduces current consumption from the household via that tax route, right? Um, but there's an upside in terms of the government doesn't typically produce that much itself. It does produce some, education perhaps. Um, Military produces its own, but generally speaking, all the funding, all the supplies that are for those government workers are coming from the firm. So anyway, so does government spending can government spending cause inflationary pressures? Sure. Meaning, if government is out there buying things, could that drive up prices? Yes, it's increasing the demand for something. Absolutely. So, anyways, injections. This is just a quick follow-up on something we talked about a long time ago, and those are injections and withdrawals. This is going to become more important as we kind of go forward in the class. So, just a couple of things to keep in mind there. Speaking of government expenditures, so growth and deficits, economic growth and deficits. So again, when government spends, that is a boon to the economy. It helps expand, it helps the economy grow. Keep that in mind as a starting point. So how can we get economic growth? You know, can we lower taxes? If we lower the tax rates, what does that do? It reduces that tax bill, if you will, first off, and it adds more to the individual households. That household piece adds more to their prospects in terms of increasing consumption and consumer goods and services, and also the prospect of savings. You know, that saving that's left over. Anyway, just a thought. Lower taxes. There's a downside of that too, of course, is that if nothing changes so far as government expenditures are concerned, what do we end up with? We end up with deficits. So this is a cautionary tale. There's a lot going on here. So if we want to, so assuming our problem is that we're having deficits, and yes, we are having deficits. We have these deficits that are huge. Remember, our current debt, looking over the right, is about 39 trillion at this point, which is an enormous amount. Keeping in mind that what our GDP is about 30 million. So our debt is actually quite a bit higher than our overall GDP or our economic growth. So words of, that's just again, further cautionary tales. So going back to 2020, of course, was in the midst of COVID. And again, the fiscal year goes from October of the preceding year through the largest portion of that calendar being from January through September in that fiscal year, if you will. We had $3.2 trillion and continued on with this COVID effect, 2.8 trillion. So roughly speaking, we had about $3 trillion, $6 trillion over the course of 2 fiscal years. Subsequent to that, you would expect that deficit spending would go down. There is less reason for government to be spending quite as much. But what's happened? Yes, it dropped initially, but now it's back on the rise. So we're up to 1.8 trillion, or we'll round up to $2 trillion a year. Not a good thing. So we'll be talking about this kind of going forward, but just to kind of give you a kind of look-see, is that, or just a kind of a teaser, would we expect these deficits to continue at this level? Actually, it's more likely that they would rise from this level going forward for a variety of reasons. But bear in mind that 2/3 of the federal budget has to do with social welfare programs, meaning social safety net programs, meaning such things as Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, other welfare programs that are out there. So 2/3 of the federal budget is dedicated to that 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 kind of automatic spending, right? Anyways, keep that in mind. So as we continue to age, chances are that those deficits will continue. We'll talk more about this kind of going forward. So again, the U.S. federal debt overall is that accumulation of those, the cumulative effect, if you will, of deficits causing the debt to go up. And if there happens to be surpluses, which we haven't had since around the year 2000, it would cause that the debt to actually go down. So again, the U.S. federal debt is equal to the cumulative effect of those deficits and surpluses. Deficits cause it to go up, surpluses brings down the debt. So in this case, going down is a good thing, right? So anyway, going from 2021 out through this 5-year period, not even 5 years, we've gone from $28 trillion. Our debt has grown by $10 trillion plus dollars. Kind of a scary thought, right? So what is the problem with this? So why are persistent deficits driving up that debt a problem? Bear in mind with this is that yes, we can incur deficits, we can borrow, but we still have to pay this back, unfortunately. And when I say pay it back, we're not going to be paid. We haven't reduced the debt in, again, 25, 26 years. We haven't run surpluses in that length of time, and we're not likely to do so going forward for a number of years. So what that means is we would have continued rising debt, but what we do have done is that we paid the interest on that debt. And as the debt continues to rise, and along with some other contributing factors, we will have higher interest to be paid on the debt. And borrowers, yes, they'll lend you money, but so long as you do what? You pay back with interest, so cover that interest on that debt. You may not ever be able to pay off that debt, but so long as you can support the interest payments on the debt, you should be okay. And that's kind of where we're at today. The unfortunate part of it is that what we're looking at is that we're looking at $1 trillion plus a year interest being paid on the debt. And that has to be done in the current budget year. Keep that in mind. Important things here. So in these next couple of slides here, we'll be talking more about the federal income tax and the whole idea, this idea behind tax cuts. Are they advisable? Is it a good idea to cut taxes when our deficits are continuing to grow? So if government doesn't reduce spending in some way, shape, or form, or collect more revenue, and is that likely to collect more revenue if we have a tax cut? Something to kind of think about. And that is in fact what has happened over the years, believe it or not, through these tax cuts. What we're really talking about are cutting tax rates. Anyway, so tax cuts. We've had a series of tax cuts going back to the Harding, Coolidge, and Hoover years, actually, in the 1920s, the Roaring Twenties, where taxes, the tax rates in 1916 were relatively low. However, they were higher than what they were with following these tax cuts. And these tax cuts, as a result of these tax cuts, the federal government actually ended up doing what? Collecting more taxes. And the reason they're collecting more taxes is because the economy was growing, the incomes were growing. Anyhow, so again, the Federal Reserve Act was passed in 1913, the same year as the tax, the 16th Amendment. I believe it was the 16th Amendment, which, yes, the 16th Amendment passed also in 1913, but the Federal Reserve was passed at the very, very end of the year, December 23rd, when most of Washington was pretty much vacated. So it's not It's always been this way. They would have gone for their Christmas vacations. Nonetheless, it was kind of snuck in at the last second. The Federal Reserve Act, meaning the Federal Reserve, those are the folks that are the keepers of interest rates. Um, Interest rates are a very important price, are they not? The lower the interest rate, the more likely it is for people, or the easier it is for people to borrow than with higher rates. More to follow on that, but it's something to keep in mind that that was done at the very, very tail end. So keep in mind with the federal income tax, it wasn't the first tax at the federal level. So Lincoln, to fund the Civil War, there was a flat tax that was implemented, flat tax of 3% on annual incomes exceeding $800 a year, when $800 a year was something. It meant something, through the Civil War. So this is what had a great deal to do with financing the Civil War on that for the North, of course, for the Union. Okay. Other tax cuts aside from Harding Coolidge again. In the 20s, Harding Coolidge and Hoover I should have on there as well. Kennedy in 1964, after his passing, it was passed, but he's the one who pushed it forward. Reagan in 1981, 1986, tremendous tax cuts in there. When I say tremendous, like huge cuts were put in place. Bush even further, and then lastly Trump in 2017. And those 2017, the TCJA, or the Tax Cuts and Job Act, was renewed, if you will, in 2025. Because usually there are sunset provisions that are in place when we put tax cuts in, meaning there's a sunset, meaning typically about a 10-year window. So it was important to renew those tax cuts from 2017, and that was part of the One Big Beautiful Bill in 2025. Okay, so again, the wisdom of tax cuts, whether what is the objective? Is it to grow the economy? Yes, they help grow the economy because it puts more income into people's hands. Remember, if you reduce taxes, there's more for consumption, more for saving. And the interesting thing about this is that with these tax cuts, we ended up with, they resulted in more tax revenues flowing in because people were working more, people were supplying more labor. And even though that they were being taxed at a lower rate, they were working more, and so more taxes were collected. Things to keep in mind. So this is just to kind of give you an idea of how this federal income tax works so far as tax brackets are concerned, so far as these marginal tax rates are concerned. So let's just walk through. For a single filer in 2025, we'll use this one example. So if you're for the first $11,000 of your income, you're being taxed at a 10% rate, okay? And for the next, going from 11.6 up to 47,000, you're taxed at that portion of your income is taxed at a 12% rate. Again, I said 2025, but I was actually talking about 2020. Anyway, I'm following 2024, but you can follow along. You can just move a column or two over to that 2025 single filer rate. So again, from that 100,000 up to about 200,000, we're looking at a 24% rate. So we're moving it up slightly. And from 100 from roughly 200,000 up to 245,000, we'll just say, at a 32% rate, and the next portion from 243,000 up to 610,000, we're looking at a 35% rate. Again, we're looking at 2024. I should be talking 2025, but focus on 2024. And over that 610,000, you're being all of that income above that level is being taxed at a 37% rate. And this is that idea behind that redistribution of income. Remember, income is different than wealth. Income is how much you earn over a period of time for the use of your productive resources. In this case, we're looking at over the period of a year. Wealth is what you have overall, a snapshot of your net worth, if you will. Okay, all of your assets less all the liabilities and your equity, your net worth, whatever's left over. So again, this is that idea again to get in your head about what we mean by these tax rates being a marginal basis, if you will. So up until this time, we've been talking about growth, 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 and the different the positive ideas, the positive thoughts behind this modern economic growth. And so let's take a look at the other side of this. And the other side of this would be the anti-growth, which we would say that growth is the problem, right? So we stop the growth, we focus more on redistribution of income, so on and so forth. So what brought us these problems out there with this growth where all the external costs, pollution, climate change, again, we're talking about suboptimal, not sustainable. The growth that was uneven, lumpy, and many were left behind with this fast growth, meaning that some people benefited from it, but more people did not benefit from it. Which again brings us that growing income disparity. In this case, it's measured by something called the Gini coefficient. There are a couple of others, but we'll just stick with the Gini coefficient. Gini was I don't know if he's alive still, I should know this, Italian economist, nonetheless, really simple. And that being that zero is the point where all incomes are equal. Everybody has the same income. There's no disparity. So the further away you get from zero, the less equal is that income. And so if you go back into the 1960s, 1970s, we had like a 0.37 index, which would have been, again, not zero, but moving, it's closer to zero at 0.36, 0.35 back in 1980 than it is today when we're above 0.4. So this is again, how did we get here? By this growth. And the problem is that incomes have become more disparate. They've become less equal, all right? So how do we solve this problem? Again, from the anti-growth side, is that we say, okay, what we can do is make things equal by raising taxes. I could do that tomorrow. I could say, okay, 100% tax, and I'll give you, back what you need to live on. So redistribution of income, but also this idea of wealth, meaning that people out there, the billionaires of the world, you didn't get it all in one year. This is over a lifetime or over X number of years, what you've accrued, what you've gained in terms of that, your overall savings and your overall wealth. And so what we could do is we could again tax that away. We could put a imposed wealth tax on, especially on billionaires. But guess what, folks? It doesn't stop there. Yes, and Elon Musk has a lot of money, and yes, you would end up taking a lot in terms of if you said, okay, we're going to take half of your whatever is $200 billion or whatever the number is right now. We're going to take half of that away, but guess what? That's not where the real money is at. The real money is at the larger numbers of people. So bear that in mind. It's always, whenever you think about raising taxes, there's a problem with trying to get that from the wealthy, if you will, those billionaires, because what can they do? They'll move, and they'll take their financial capital with them. They will, and this happens all the time. People, that's one thing for sure, is that financial capital is something that is mobile. It can be moved. Then you can prevent that from happening, but then that causes other problems if you think about it. If someone were to say, okay, we're going to take half of your wealth, you're going to do whatever you need to do to protect your wealth, protect your interest, right? So again, pass on growth and focus on redistribution. Let's stop this madness, this growth, this drive toward growth, and let's instead focus on making our incomes more equal, making our wealth more equal, equalize these things. And this is when I talk about the danger of specialization. This is something that our buddy Adam Smith included in his exegesis, his book, The Wealth of Nations. And they found that specialization was dehumanizing, meaning that people doing the same thing over and over again, whether you get carpal tunnel or whatever, it can be dehumanizing. But guess what? That's the price that we pay for efficiency. And to be more efficient, we like that as the consumers because it lowers prices ultimately. Anyway, so this danger of specialization. So I've kind of talked both sides of my mouth. I was going to talk about anti-growth being, positive from their perspective, but there are two sides to all these things to consider. Sustainability, resources are limited. We cut back, or we will run out. We'll run out of oil. We'll run out of our productive resources. None of these they're not untrue. Yes, we will run out. We've run out of resources in the past. We ran out of whale oil. We stopped killing whales because there were no whales left to kill. It's not to say that they haven't come back, but you kind of get the idea is that this sustainability argument that is always out there. Our resources are limited, right? So this is that anti-growth, and a key salient point is these people being left behind so far as incomes are concerned. This income disparity, via this Gini coefficient. It's not untrue. And how do we address these problems with the Gini coefficient? This income disparity. Anyway, that's the tough part. How do we do this? Through competition. How do we reinforce competition? That's the question. What is the role of government is to protect what? Competition. Not individual competitors, but competition. You get my point. So once again, to kind of reiterate what we talked about on the pro-growth side, we've already been talking through this, but just to kind of give you an idea, the word boredom, the first time that came up was with our buddy Charles Dickens, who I've tried to remember before. I tried to note him in class, talking about the textile mills, the production, the small hands. So the younger the child working, you can get in there and into that complicated equipment and fix the problems. And of course, what happens, you end up with kids losing their hands. But regardless, Charles Dickens, fame, Oliver Twist and Christmas Story, etc. Anyways, Charles Dickens wrote in the book Bleak House. There was the first reference, I think officially, of the word boredom. Not to say boredom wasn't around, but it was not as prevalent, we'll say. And this is the pro-growth. Remember, more leisure, more time for leisure. And leisure is a normal good. Pro-growth brought us more education, brought us more recreation. Again, more income driving that. And more education brought us on to more income. It provides a pathway to more income, to higher incomes. And again, that bonus, if you will, that educational bonus is passed on to society writ large through those competitive markets that we've talked about over and over and over again. Increased amount of recreation, more time for recreation, better medical care, period. Improved medical care because of the demand for it, rising. Dental care before the mid 19th century, there probably wasn't much in the way of dental care, really. That's the old story about like the barber. The barber was also the dentist. They had the tools, so they're the ones that would be pulling teeth. So they were the stand-in dentist of the day. More focus on arts, more focus on time to be able to enjoy your leisure, right? Focus more on family, continue, more focus on the spiritual side of things rather than, subsistence farming. We're able to reap the benefits of of your labor more income, providing with more leisure time to focus more on spiritual things. Again, it's not to say that we do, but that enabled this whole idea of this pro-growth, this whole idea. And on one last note with this, one thing to note is that this competitive market model, this competitive free market model, however imperfect it is, and how far from it we actually are, it has done a great deal in terms of removing people in places like India and China, moving them into more of a middle class increasing the incomes of the overall population and pushing people into higher incomes, period. So this has brought tens, if not hundreds of millions of people out of dire poverty, right? Anyway, good, bad, lots of other things. So anti-growth, pro-growth. So one last point here with this, when we talk about this theoretical welfare economics. Again, it's more of a micro topic, but that there are macro implications of this as well. So economic growth through that competitive free market model, right? So again, this theoretical welfare economics focuses on these notions of equity and efficiency. Equity, where the productive resources earn no more or less, so you're covering your opportunity costs, so you're getting your opportunity cost level of compensation. You are being compensated at a fair level. It's enough to kind of keep you employed at that firm, not just your labor, but all of your other productive resources as well. Keep that in mind. You're not being overcompensated because in order to have efficiency, the firm has to be only paying equitable wages, has to be only paying the equitable competitive free market um, level for the use of those productive resources for the labor and entrepreneurship capital plan. In order to, via that competitive free market model, pass this efficiency on to whom? Onto the household, driving that consumer sovereignty, where the maximum number of goods and services at the lowest possible prices. The reinforcement is, of course, through those substitutes, meaning that adequate competition with reasonable substitutes where firms are not able to do what? Drive prices up without that market power. It's a great idea. Are we there? No. Would we like to be there? Yes, that would be the ideal. How do we get there? One way, again, would be so far as government, being again in that role of what? Protecting competition, not competitor. So reinforcing the competition. On the macro side, because of, again, of this whole equity efficiency process in this theoretical welfare economics, it reduces the impact of business cycles or economic cycles. Shorter and shallower recessions, markets clear more readily, and you don't have that market power, you don't have that price power, so that it reduces the whole idea behind those sticky prices, or I guess more specifically or better is price rigidity. Reduces the likelihood of price rigidity. It enables markets to fluctuate as they need to in order to do what? To prevent that market failure. So further, addresses the twin biases of inflation and recession in the process. So inflation is held at bay due to the competitive market forces. Firms are unable to raise prices. Remember, prices are raised by firms. When we're talking about that equity piece of it, it minimizes, reduces, eliminates producer surplus, and that is the path toward efficiency. You cannot have efficient markets unless you meet that equity standard at the firm, for sure. It's required, and in order to pass that on, that efficiency onto the household as consumer, that's the enforcement tool, of course, is that competition, having lots and lots of substitutes. Again, we're continuing on with this whole macro side of this theoretical welfare economics. The high employment, since market clear, surpluses and shortages are cleared more readily, more rapidly, so you don't have as much disruption in terms of employees being laid off. It's not to say that they won't be laid off. It's not to say that they won't be replaced or moved here, there, or elsewhere, but it will be as high as it can be. How about that? Again, that's the key to this economic growth, is that efficiency. Because again, what do we want? We want the maximum number of goods and services at the lowest possible price. That again is that efficiency. So it's all neat and nice and theoretical. Yes, theoretical welfare economics, but is it possible? Probably not, but we could certainly move more in that direction. It would be helpful for us as society, for sure, and us as individual households on both sides. Job retention, productive resources, our productive resources will be used productively, right? And on the household as consumer side, because that will reduce prices via that competition in the markets. So the last bit here again is when we talk about federal income taxes, it's redistributed by design. So the idea behind this again with those graduated taxes, that those higher income, those higher tax brackets, um, is to try to push us closer toward a more equal income distribution. So it's not going through the circular flow in terms of market forces making this happen. This is government stepping in to kind of fill in the blank to drive that income distribution. When we talk about transfer payments are, again, are such things as Social Security payments, Medicare payments, Medicaid payments, other welfare programs. And again, when we talk about transfer payments, it's not income. Remember, income is for the current use of those productive resources, the compensation for the current use of those productive resources. Again, the Gini index, rather, or Gini coefficient, that is our measurement, our metric for. There's also something called Lorentz curve, but same idea is that the closer we move to zero, the more equal we become. We're not there, right? Some of the problems that are associated with this modern economic growth would include such things as specialization. It's dehumanizing, but hey, it's necessary because we all want to reap the benefits of that. There are ways around this to make it less dehumanizing by doing what? Substituting capital for that, the human process of doing these things, but there's a downside because you just lost the labor that's associated with doing that job. However mundane or dangerous or boring that job might be, there was compensation flowing through to the household for the use of their labor for it. But once you substitute capital for that, physical capital for that, the labor is displaced. Anyway, clean environment, normal good. What I mean by that is that air pollution is not a normal good. So there's this trade-off between that diminishing returns, the rising cost of trying to get rid of that pollution. So there's kind of a sweet spot out there where we'll tolerate some pollution, but we would like to reduce it as much as possible, as much as is economically feasible, is really what we're saying. Nonetheless, again, the clean environment is a normal good. We do not want situations where we have rampant asthma because we've got air that's so thick you can't see through it. That's because of pollution. We don't want that, but we still want to have the production, but cleaner, right? So think about that in terms of production of oil, for example. The U.S. has probably the best, cleanest, best process again in terms of processing oil and into useful, gasoline and diesel fuel and others, via the, extraction at the well, transportation to the refinery, the refinery itself, the transportation to gas stations, and the gas stations as well. We have a pretty, relatively speaking, we probably have the cleanest, if not a significantly cleaner process involved there than most other nations in the world. Anyway, so, but again, those are normal goods. So expanding middle classes is something I mentioned before. One half of the world is middle class, meaning the question mark here is that because of India and China, we're talking about combined populations of close to 3 billion people, and where there was not a middle class before. And I'm not going to get into what I mean by that, but people with reasonable amounts of income will just say that. There was a very, very low percentage. Now there's a significantly higher percentage, and we're probably talking about bringing several hundred million people out of dire poverty into that, quote unquote middle class. So this was from years ago. This is prior to COVID. They were talking about reducing or eliminating absolute poverty. Absolute poverty meaning sub-Saharan poverty. People are actually starving to death. That type of poverty, they were talking by the year 2030 through agricultural, through through GMOs and genetically modified organisms, et cetera, different processes, that to kind of push poverty out, push it aside. And we're looking at 2030 being the target date. I don't know where we're at now, but hopefully we're continuing moving along that path. And so we've met these challenges before that we were encountering right now. Whale oil. We ran out of whales, so what do? We turned to petroleum products. Steam engines, and again, 1776 with James Watt, the introduction of the steam engine moved us away from having textile mills that were tied directly to rivers. Now we could pipe water from the river into our factory that's a few blocks away from the river, and that would be the feeder for the supply for our steam engines, right? Again, thank you, James Watt. Those types of things. Other things more common, more recent, of course, microchips, fracking. We're talking about nuclear power, these modular nuclear reactors that they're much smaller, much more, I don't even know if they're more efficient, assuming they are, much smaller and much easier to kind of install. Not 15-year window in order to get these reactors online. Could happen very, very quickly. And remember, our model is out there with China. China producing, a coal plant a month. China producing multiple nuclear reactors, for the production of energy. This is the driving force again behind this next concept, this artificial intelligence, which has taken the world by storm. Certainly us. Business intelligence. These are just some different, very pieces of that data analysis. Being able to analyze massive amounts of data that's out there and the algorithms associated with that, predictive algorithms, right? Predictive AI, I forget the terminology behind this, but everybody kind of understands what these algorithms are. They're basically, again, to kind of, they're gathering all the data together and they're guessing what you're going to be doing next. And this is, again, in economics, it's all about preferences and trying to determine what those preferences might be. So these algorithms are something that are main drivers behind all this AI, making this stuff work. So again, our example of the textile mills, we didn't like this technology, and so we went about the group of Luddites. They were destroying and sabotaging machinery and textile mills, trying to prevent it, and because of dehumanizing, taking away jobs from people. And again, this is our main fear today, right? So the Industrial Revolution, moving away from the agrarian to the urban, and we saw different ways this has played out, not just in Europe, but of course in the U.S. We were, in 1850, we were primarily an agricultural, meaning at least 50% of our population was agriculturally oriented, especially like in the South versus the North. All these things were also part of what was going on with the Civil War in addition to slavery. There were a lot of different, there was a lot of different competition. I shouldn't say there was competition between agricultural versus an urban-based, industrialized society. And it happened in the U.S. over the course of, less than 100 years. In China, it happened less than 50 years. And guess what? With AI, we're moving at a much more rapid pace. So if we look back on 2026 in the year 2031, what a different world that we will have. And this is all being brought to us via this artificial intelligence. That's why I have a question here about hyperhistory. Yes, we're certainly experiencing hyperhistory. Things are going on that are happening very, very quickly. And so again, artificial intelligence, does it scare you? Yes, it scares me. It scares all of us because it's the fear of the unknown. But guess what? We've managed this in the past, and I have no doubt that we'll manage it somehow going forward. So just keep the faith, and keep your eyes open and your mind open about the possibilities that are brought that come with this AI. The possibilities these good possibilities. It's not just bad stuff that's out there. Okay. Okay, that's a wrap, folks.